Okay. Well, good morning, and especially good morning to Sue. Welcome to the Southwest, virtually, and to Bristol. And welcome everyone who is going to contribute this morning. We're going to talk about one of the awards from our 2019 awards competition, which was the 27th year of that competition for the Southwest. Getting to be quite a record. There were 12 entries, 6 shortlisted entries, and 3 of those shortlisted entries were submitted by the Nash Partnership. But we're going to hear from the Nash Partnership in relation to the Southmead development in particular this morning, which showcases all that we see as excellent with the planning work in this kind of situation. So welcome everybody. I don't know whether we need to introduce each other particularly. Should we? Yeah, right. So if we could go along the line and introduce. I've got here now Mike Fox starting. Has everyone got the same screen in front of them with all the pictures?
I haven't, but we'll be led by you, I guess.
You go first, Mike. Yeah.
Okay. So my name's Mike Fox. I'm a planner at the Nash Partnership, and we were a combination of planning consultants, urban designers, and architects on the project.
Thank you. Right. Now, it's not working, is it? Who
okay.
next?
I'm Charlotte Dayburn. I'm the RTPI South West Regional Coordinator. Sue, would you like to go next?
Well, I'm Sue, and I'm RTPI President for 2020, and I'm absolutely delighted to be part of this visit. It's an absolute first doing virtual visits, but they seem to work really, really well. And this one I'm particularly excited about because, as you know, my passion and the thing that linked everything I've done in planning together is planning is about people and it is about community engagement.
Thank you.
Paul?
Right.
Hello, my name is Paul Owens. I work in Bristol City Council's housing delivery team, and the council is delighted to be involved in this project.
Yeah, thanks. Right.
Amy?
Amy?
Morning, everyone. I'm Amy Caneo, and I'm the Chief Executive at Southmead Development Trust.
And Finlay?
So I'm Finlay McNabb. I run a small practice called Streets Reimagined, and we work with Nash Partnership on the project, particularly around community engagement and urban design and how you join the two together.
And Mike?
And Mike. He's muted. Mike, you'll have to unmute.
There we go. Go on, Mike.
Yes, good morning. I'm the chair of the Southmead Regeneration Project.
Right. Thank you. So we're all introduced. Excellent. I think everyone should have an idea of the program, which yeah, everyone's got that, which Charlotte has kindly provided everyone with. Okay. So we're going to start off with the actual presentation of the project, and to start that, over to Mike Fox.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. That's great. So I will now take us to the first slide, which should come up any moment.
I've got the head.
There we go.
Right. In. Yep.
I presume everyone can see that. Yes, I'll take that as a yes.
Do thumbs up. It's easier, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, so I think first of all, I'd like to say I think we're honoured to be presenting this project. While I'm presenting as a consultant, and as is Finn, I think what has backed up a lot of the work the consultants have done on this project has been a huge amount of effort and work that preceded the project, done by the community. In particular in relation to the community plan, but it always sat in the background in relation to the day-to-day running of this project, really. So while we're presenting it as planners and as planning consultants, I think the community deserves a huge amount of recognition, as does the council, in bringing the project forward. So that really is reflected in the fact that it's not just Nash and Streets Reimagined presenting today. So to give you a bit of context to Southmead, as I think Sue was saying in the pre-discussion we were just having, it can be quite hard to locate Southmead on a map. It's not one of the better known parts of Bristol. It's located within North Bristol in what you could term a kind of belt of inter and post-war development that happened, you know, obviously in the 1920s, 30s, and then from the sort of 50s onwards. It was built around it was planned around the idea of the sort of garden suburb. Very, very grand vision. Around the principles which at the time were very much in vogue and seen as the future, but now we recognise there were some flaws in that approach, and that is the idea of building at lower densities around cars, separate, sort of semi-detached, detached, sometimes terraced housing with their own green space, quite large expanses of green space, and then large areas of shared public space, such as at the heart of this image you can see Glencoyne Square, and then to the kind of top right of that you can also see a strip of land called Greystoke Avenue. So in Southmead there are some very large expanses of open space, which originally were intended to be very grand squares. So example, if you look around Glencoyne Square in this image, you can see several very large public buildings that make very bold statements. To the kind of north of that, or to the above that, you can also see lots of retail facilities with lots of life and lots of activity. So it was a very bold original vision, and it was part of the Homes for Heroes programme that Bristol had in the idea of rehousing people after the war. It was also related to slum upgrade, slum removal in the centre of Bristol and relocation of people out to what was seen as being greener pastures, if you like. So it was all very well intentioned, and it was a lot of the housing was affordable as well. However, that has brought with it some problems as time has gone on. One of the key things you'll see if you look at the image on the bottom right is actually that a lot of those public buildings were never really delivered as envisaged. I think part of the problem was that the estate, if you look to the south of Greystoke Avenue, was it was built in the 1930s, and then everything to the north of that was really built in the 1950s on a lower budget. So a lot of the key public facilities were really stripped away as it was realised. In addition to that, it's actually creating quite an interesting psychological and political divide within the community. With I understand that there is a bit of a divide between those who live in the housing from the 1930s and those that live in the housing from the 1950s. So this kind of the centre of Southmead is quite important as the glue in tying the wider community together. And obviously housing built around cars isn't great if you don't own a car. It's also not very sustainable environmentally, and it's not great at fostering good places in terms of encouraging social interaction on streets and the kind of things that, for example, Jane Jacobs was talking about in the 1960s. So it faces a number of physical problems that have then manifested themselves in socioeconomic problems. So it's one of the 10% most deprived wards in the country. The level of skills and education in the community are synonymous with more deprived areas, unfortunately. And you know, lower levels of employment and lower skilled employment, and a physical environment not conducive to exercise has also resulted in issues of health, mental and physical health, probably epitomised nowhere better than the fact that Southmead has a life expectancy 9.4 years lower than neighbouring Henleys. So it faces challenges. However, the community itself has been really working to resolve those challenges for 20 or 30 years now. So I was just going to hand over briefly to Amy of the Trust to talk a bit about their work in addressing some of those issues, and then after that to Mike to talk about the community plan. So Amy, are you able to take over?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I started working for Southmead Development Trust just in October, so I've just been involved in the last 6 months of this project. So it's really, really exciting to kind of take over and have a chance to take it over through to the next stage. So yeah, we're a community anchor organisation and a development trust, and we really exist, with the sole purpose of making Southmead a better place for the people who live there. Really focusing on Southmead, but also our work has started to spread across neighbouring parts of North Bristol as well. And really with that fundamental principle to everything that we do, that you create better places when you work in a really community-based way. So you look at how the local community, local partners, institutions, the public sector, the voluntary and the private sector as well, can all work together, and how we create those spaces for those conversations and for the development of ideas to progress really. And also we kind of really fundamentally believe in the idea that people are the best solution to their own problems. So we really believe in this kind of asset-based approach, which is not about saying, what's wrong, what do you not like about this design that we put forward, really working with people right from the very beginning with a much more of a co-production type approach to really look at what's wrong, what's strong and not what's wrong, how can we work together to create our own solutions and to create the, realise a vision that people want to see in their own neighbourhood. So yeah, people often describe us like a big old tree. So we've been around for a long time. We've been around for about 25 years. Organisations like ours kind of just they stay in a community. So things come and go, politicians come and go, different initiatives come and go, different projects, different funding streams, and organisations like Southmead Development just stick around for it all. We've got an old school building that the trust took over in 1995, and it's a 9-acre site that was a secondary school, and now it's a health and wellbeing hub, a community hub, a business and a business centre as well. So it's that kind of real principle that you put all those things together in one place and you just see what happens, and you don't necessarily know what's going to happen, but all sorts of things happen. And we're kind of, a lot of things hang off us in the community, so we provide free space for the food bank and for a lot of groups to happen and things like that. So it's kind of like that idea that we've got like branches and lots of things hanging off. And as this really kind of related to the withdrawal of the local authority from local communities to quite a large extent over over the last 10 years or so, the trust has taken more of a leadership role around bringing investment into the area. But also, representing the area and making things happen. And back in 2015, the trust took a kind of a key role making the community plan happen, which I think Mike is going to talk a little bit about. And over, Mike Murchison, sorry, we've got two mics, haven't we? And Mike Fox just talked about some of the kind of deprivation indicators in Southmead, and it's true, they exist, but over the last few years since the trust has been working in this way, we've seen some real kind of changes and shifts in some of those real life outcomes for people, really fundamental things around changes in employment and education outcomes, reductions in antisocial behaviour, improvements in all the quality of life indicators. And I'm not going to say the trust should take all the credit for that. Of course, there's all sorts of other things that have been happening in Bristol, but most people who know Southmead and know the trust say that the trust has had a significant role to play in some of those shifts. Without really a lot of money, we're just here to kind of create those spaces and places for things to happen. That's a bit about us.
Great. Okay, Mike, are you able to talk a bit about the Southmead Community Plan? Mike.
5 years ago, 2015, a group of us came together to basically sort of say, what's wrong with Southmead and how can we do something about it? And along with the trust, we came up with the idea of basically commissioning a survey. Initially, we put it out to tender. We weren't very impressed with the tender, so we decided that we'd take it on ourselves. and we designed a series of questions, and a team of mainly ladies, I have to say, went out door knocking, and they door knocked every house on the estate. And basically, they wouldn't take no for an answer. They filled in these forms, and the forms basically formed the basis of where we are now. It's interesting to note that when they were talking about Ironside and the shopping area, there wasn't one positive comment about Ironside. People were saying it was tired, it was beyond its, basically past its sell-by date. The square itself, as you probably know, attracts all sorts of antisocial behavior. It's underused and is ripe for development. So basically, having asked the community, we then set up the regeneration board, and we've been involved in the recruiting of the project manager, of the architects themselves, and of the contractors. And we've been involved in all sorts of pop-up consultations. I mean, what we've done in the past is just rock up in various places of Southmead, sometimes put a table up, sometimes talk to people, show them what the Nash Partnership had done. Some people said, "Oh, we don't like that."
Hi, Mike. We're losing you a bit. Mike? Okay, is it best perhaps if we skip on and then Mike can chip in as we move forward? So I think he was touching upon some of the things that we were going to talk about anyway. So Mike, when we can hear you again, you can jump back in as and when things arise. But for now, I was thinking I was going to hand
move on. Yeah.
On to Finn. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, that was a really good introduction, really, to some of the, I suppose, the foundations of the project. When we came in as consultants, we were very much conscious of the fact that we were joining a process that was ongoing, really, and we had to understand that context and to sort of set out our approach accordingly. And I think that was very much the case in terms of the sort of initial phase of how the project started. So as Mike mentioned, there was actually a community selection process. So we had 3 days of exercises. You could think of it as sort of an SAS selection situation. Wasn't quite that difficult, but it was close. But we did a series of kind of events with the community. We did street stalls out in the street. We did something called speed dating with different stakeholders in the community, and one-to-one discussions around how we would bring them into the loop. And I think what's really important is it set the tone for the project, and it really made it absolutely crystal clear that it was the community that were driving the project. And so I think that was really important, a key lesson that we come on to. But yeah, I think that was just a sort of really crucial element to it. I think the way we were able to explain our approach, so we very much made a strong case for how we would work with people, is probably what helped us to be successful with winning that sort of commission. And I suppose the other thing just to say is that I don't actually think any other approach would have worked. If you're looking to build potentially 300 homes within an existing neighbourhood, you do need to work collaboratively with local stakeholders and people. So it was absolutely the right way to go about it. And I don't think we would have been successful if we hadn't done that. I think we come into a bit more detail about some of the techniques we use later, but as an introduction to the approach, I'll hand back to Mike.
Thanks, Finn. Sorry. Just waiting for this to move. Sorry, Charlotte, the slides are a little bit slowed. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so obviously there were multiple stakeholders involved in this project. So I think one we haven't talked about is the City Council, actually, and they are a real key player in this. So I'm going to ask Paul Owens to speak in a moment. But just to say, I think alluded to by as alluded to by Finn, the objective was to deliver for this project somewhere in the region of, I think, 300 homes. Across multiple sites across the centre of Southmead, and that's not the kind of land that's just available sitting around in the hands of somebody like Southmead Development Trust. So a real key player in this was the City Council. This diagram is meant to talk about the different stakeholders that are involved, and obviously we've got the Southmead Development Trust who reflect the community in themselves, but also behind that you've got various arms of the council. There is the sort of housing delivery side, and then you've also got the side of the council that deals with well, the regulatory side. So if we're going to create a master plan and deliver it, obviously we need to engage with the council as a planning authority. And then there was also the issue of some funding available to deliver infrastructure and the design that goes with that, which is also in the hands of the council. So I was just going to ask Paul to quickly jump in there and talk about the council's objectives for the project, if I may.
Hi, my name's Paul Owens. I do work for the council and council's housing delivery team, which is part of the growth and regeneration division within the council. Bristol, as you'll probably appreciate, in a UK context, is a relatively successful and vibrant city. However, not all communities, unfortunately, in Bristol share in the opportunities and prosperity and investment opportunities of the rest of the city. Some years ago, Southmead was designated as a regeneration priority for the council. Currently, we have an elected mayor within the city who is very keen on empowering local communities to move things forward, do what's required for their area, and rather than the council necessarily do everything for local communities, it's really important that local communities identify and move towards what they see as needs in the area. Southmead is a well-connected, vibrant and positive community, and as has been previously mentioned, the local communities have come up with a Southmead plan, which guides investment and aspirations for the area, and subsequent to that there was a Southmead master plan developed, okay, which is really important way of articulating local needs and priorities within the area. The council are very pleased to be able to support this, and this very much chimes with the council's political agenda to be able to provide 2,000 new homes per annum in the city, of which 800 will be affordable. The regeneration projects being put forward, led by the Southmead Development Trust and local communities, make a great contribution to placemaking and successful communities, which we're all striving for. In order to support this delivery of this project, as Mike has alluded to, there are many arms of the council involved in ensuring the success of Southmead as a place. And as part of this project and inspired by this project, the council has actually applied and obtained from Homes England Housing Infrastructure Fund investment, which the council are able to, in this case, predominantly invest in the public realm, the upgrading of the Southmead Town Centre and the public realm, which will also support not just developments at and around Glencoyne Square, but hopefully support the economic vitality and sustainability of the district shopping centre. And in this era of pandemic and economic uncertainty, we are very pleased that this project is coming forward, because we very much think it will also support economic recovery in the city, both for the residents of Southmead and for the city more generally. So it very much, this project put forward by local residents very much chimes with the council's key agendas, and we're very keen to support the ongoing delivery.
Great, thanks, Paul. So in terms of the project, how it was being managed, governance-wise, obviously the Southmead Development Trust were very much at the heart of it, but sitting behind them you had the council's housing delivery team, plus also their own design teams who wanted to work with us to see a design come forward that would help us to unlock the master plan for the full 300 homes across the centre. So it was quite complex to manage in that respect, but it had a lot of political buy-in, which is a very, very powerful thing. Finn, are you able to talk about some of the tools we use?
Schoolboy error, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I suppose we're very keen to have this collaborative design approach, but how do you actually go about that in practical terms? So I think one of the first things we did was recognising there was quite a long history in Southmead. Actually, was doing some stakeholder mapping, identifying local groups, active people, and actually going to meet them and giving it the time and energy. In some ways, you think about it, it's quite simple, really, isn't it? It's a concept, but actually going to meet people and talking through the background to the project. The community plan was absolutely critical in these conversations, explaining that sort of foundation and where it came from. And I think, you know, potentially what you're suggesting could be quite controversial to people. So having that ability to go through the stages and the history to it, I think was really critical. And then building those local groups to kind of advocate and to get involved in the project. So I went to a lot of coffee mornings, all sorts of groups, all sorts of things, and quite informal in some cases, just to kind of sort of get the, I suppose, the concept out there and the reasons behind it. I think the other thing we did was, as a general approach, trying to be very accessible and visible and present. So as Mike Murch mentioned, we did an awful lot of, Mike did it alongside us, didn't you, Mike? Which was the sort of street stall events. So we'd go and we'd put a table and some seats and some plans on a corner of a street and talk to people as they went by. And I think, although it seems quite simple, the real advantage of that is you can have one-to-one conversations with people and give them the time and energy that maybe you couldn't have at a more formal, structured session. And alongside that, we were able then also to invite people to a more structured session later on and explain the sort of background to it. And we did, I think it was also a shop on Arnside Road where we sort of commandeered it with working alongside the partners, the Development Trust, and sort of had regular kind of poster updates about what we were doing and how you could get involved. We also looked at where things were already happening, like the Southmead Festival and like the youth club, all those sort of things, and actually went to people where they were, as opposed to expecting them to come to us maybe in the back of a town hall or something. That all slowly built up towards a more structured, more detailed session, which we did 2 workshop sessions, which were incredibly well attended. I think it was, I can't remember the numbers, but it was more than you would get on a typical project. And those workshops were interactive and participative. So it wasn't simply a case of people presenting, but actually we brought out building blocks and tools, and people, come to think of it, I've got some here. We use lots of physical elements so people could get hands-on and really start to play around with ideas, and in a way that made people not sort of hold back, but feel open to play and to generate ideas. And we had a genuine 2-way conversation about elements that we thought were special about Southmead we wanted to retain, and things that we thought were possible to change, and how we could make the best use of the space there. So it was I suppose I just really want to stress, it was a very genuine workshop exercise. It wasn't a tokenistic activity. We were generally trying to understand how we can make the space work the best possible to improve the area. I think the other thing to sort of point out was that actually the time period was quite interesting. It was relatively short, so a lot of that work was done from sort of master plan to quite detailed level within a sort of a 3-month period. In terms of engagement, there's lots of details that would do. I'm not saying the whole project was done in 3 months, but the sort of the process of reaching out to people and working through to a sort of spatial framework, that was done relatively quickly. And I think we did work very hard in that time period. And I think there was an advantage to that, which was the momentum was really built. It was very well known what was happening locally, I think. And that was that helped the process. There was a lot of interest, and people did sort of have I think there was a sort of genuine sense of ownership built over the project, and we were able to sort of hold a narrative to explain why we were doing it and how it was developing according to feedback that was coming back. So I think that's probably the sort of summary of that sort of early kind of engagement process. But as I say, just to stress, it's very much about inviting people in and being hands-on and being visible and being responsive. I think that was the key aspects to it. So I'll hand back to Mike.
Okay, yeah, so in terms of the outputs of that phase, so that was, as Finn said, a 3-month process of preparing the master plan for the centre, which is, which is pretty quick time frame to turn around a very engagement intensive master plan of this nature. So the final master plan looks something like this. So so you can see in the sort of top left hand corner, you've got Glencoyne Square. So the proposal involves building on a fairly substantial proportion of that, maybe 2/3 of that, to deliver a mix of housing and new community facilities. So at the heart of that, on the ground floor and in some cases first floor level, there is a sort of community hub which would involve potentially a library, health centre, and a mix of other sort of community oriented uses, which extends the high street, if you like, further north. And then the idea would be to have a more consolidated, better quality green space that remains, which is then pulled down into Arnside, the main centre, through greening up the public realm, which at the moment is a bit stark and hard. That in turn, for example, through locating the leisure centre, the health centre in the ground floor, frees up the current health centre site, which is at the very top of the screen, to deliver more housing. There was also at this stage we identified scope to relocate an existing play space in the sort of extreme left of the image into the open space, which in turn frees up another space for delivering more housing on the left hand side. Relocating the library, in theory, freed up space for Aldi to expand, which is a popular supermarket and facility for local people, which I understand people come from far and wide to go to, as they probably do in many places. It offers fairly, cheap, quite good quality food. And then at the southern end of this kind of central spine, you've got a southern pole, which was the idea. It's denoted as C here, was to provide a further sort of community space, which potentially could have been relocated from a space further south, which in turn would then free that up for housing, but also through building on this central strip, the idea was to unify north and south Southmead. So it was meant to be quite a symbolic gesture as well. Although that element, I think, was subject to some it was slightly contentious, if you like. Some people didn't want to see the central green space built on. There were issues with whether or not you could relocate the current community centre, which has a very kind of loyal following and we understand was paid for brick by the local community. So there were some quite sensitive issues it proposed, but actually on the whole, people were very supportive of the final master plan. So we then took it forward to phase 1, which was actually the development on Glencoyne Square, which I was just pointing out is actually kind of in the top left-hand side, top left of the picture there. So we tried to continue the sort of collaborative, people-led process, and also we ramped up then the engagement with the council as a planning authority, because we were leading towards the submission of a detailed planning application for phase 1. That was the route we chose to go down, rather than a more perhaps long-winded but more arguably conventional route of looking at doing something like a neighbourhood plan, because I think Southmead Development Trust took the view that momentum was critical, support was being built, and also the funding had a limited time frame. So really the HIF funding that Paul's mentioned. So we had to really act quickly. And we felt we'd built enough support to do that. So we then progressed with a planning performance agreement with the council to then develop that into a detailed application for development on Glencoyne Square. In parallel with that kind of what hopefully would be a more rigorous engagement with the local authorities, we also wanted to continue to build momentum with the community and keep them on side as we develop more detailed proposals. So I was just going to hand back to Finn quickly to talk about the community element as well.
Sorry, I did it again. I think it's that key thing of it being an ongoing process, and it doesn't stop at any point. You continue to talk to people. So after we had the master plan, we continue that engagement of talking about more and more details. We started very strategic and then worked all the way down to things like the type of brick, colour, what balconies we should have. I know the Development Trust took people on trips to see other sites as well to see what the specifics of it really. And it's that ongoing conversation that doesn't stop at any point really. And that was, I think, that helped to continue that sort of sense of involvement and ownership in the project. There was also some innovation as well around doing virtual reality mock-ups of the proposals, and people could come and look at those and actually experience it. We ultimately we had a lot of support for the project, but I think we should possibly mention that it wasn't straightforward. I mean, there were people that initially found it quite controversial what was being suggested, and the process did help to bring people on board, but it wasn't simple. It took time, and all these different tools and activities helped to make the case and to get people to understand why it was important, and a lot of conversations as well, a lot of one-to-one conversations. So yes, ultimately there was a very high level of consensus and support for the project, but that wasn't always the case, and I think that it's because of the process that we all undertook as partners was really critical in that happening, I think. And if we'd taken the foot off the pedal at any point, we could have lost that, I think. So it's really important to have that continuous input and support. I'll hand you back.
Okay, thank you. So the ultimate phase 1 scheme that evolved through this process was for 120 homes. It's 85% affordable. It includes a health centre and library at ground floor level. There was quite a lot of design work involved in and sort of coordination, if you like, in getting some consensus on how those two uses would integrate within themselves and also with the rest of the building. There was also a mix of other ground floor uses that were constantly evolving as we were going through this process, because the real challenge that the Trust faces is securing funding for non-residential uses in particular. And in the end, we've secured we went in with an application for a flexible consent for the ground floor level on both sides of the central Arnside North, as it's being termed, so the central street. We had some robust discussions with the council over the design of the main open space, because again, funding is a big issue for them, and maintenance challenges under the current sort of financial climate for them. So in the end, we went up for a design that was a bit more stripped back and less ambitious than we'd initially proposed, and didn't include a play area, but with the idea that it could then be built on in partnership with the local community over time. So if you have more of a blank canvas, then actually the Trust can use some of its sort of social prescribing programs and community gardening programs to then do planting schemes that get all the community involved and engaged. Yeah, so it really is quite a critical first phase for unlocking many of the sites, and in itself delivers a significant contribution towards new housing and other community facilities in the community. So in terms of some of the lessons we learned, I mean, all along throughout this process, funding has been a challenge, and Southmead Development Trust have had the biggest headache because they've had to work out where to source the funding from. And it is a real challenge when, for example, you're dealing with non-residential uses where there isn't much funding available for it. So in some ways, it's a regeneration project and we're trying to look long term. So we've had to look beyond immediate pots of funding and say, if we can at least get a consent that's flexible enough, then we hopefully, but by the time we're coming to build it, we will be able to secure the funding. But you've got to build the confidence in people that can be the case. We've also had community engagement has obviously been central to everything throughout this process on multiple levels. I mean, the Trust themselves have obviously borne a lot of the weight of that work, but we've also done plenty of it ourselves, particularly through Finn. But we've had to use a real variety of tools to engage people, particularly to ensure we reach things like hard to reach groups, and we've had to make sure that we can keep the momentum going. Managing multiple stakeholders, so we've talked about Bristol's involvement, and when we talk about Bristol, we're not just talking about Bristol as either a landowner or as a regulatory authority, we're talking about both and as a designer, and we had to work alongside them as a design team. So we had kind of monthly design team meetings with the council to understand how their wider vision for the the wider area building on our original master plan proposal, then integrated with our phase 1 proposal, for example. And obviously it's also very political. So, you know, there's been some thorny planning issues that have arisen through this process, because obviously, you know, it's something that's constantly in flux, local politics, particularly with things like the climate emergency. And we've had to have some robust conversations and over issues like, you know, the heating strategy for the scheme and that sort of thing. So, you know, it's not been easy and it's been complicated, but you know, we've been collaborative, both with the local authority, as you would probably hope for a scheme of this nature, and the wider community. And I think our general view has been that if you share the problems, then actually you can work out ultimately more innovative and successful solutions in the longer term. And I think that's borne out by the fact that the scheme was submitted, the phase 1 scheme was submitted back in September and approved in May. And in terms of the public consultation feedback, I think it got 34 letters of support against, versus 4 letters of against the scheme. So that's quite, you know, that's pretty high level of approval, considering we're building on public open space. And it was approved unanimously at the council's committee back in May, with very little discussion on the whole, other than a lot of supportive comments. So hopefully that, you know, our approach has been, you could say, rubber stamped through that process. And, you know, we found it a very enlightening and engaging and really, I think, challenging but enjoyable project to work on. And I think everyone that has played a part in that.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Well, I think just moving on to say something very briefly about the response of the judges. After all of that, I'm not sure I need to say very much in relation to seeing this as a piece of planning excellence. The judges were very impressed with all the aspects of this, and particularly the community involvement and the way in which the consultants, the city and the trust had all worked together to keep the momentum going. And I think that's indicative, or an example of that, is the fact that the permission has gone through recently and quite swiftly. So that in itself is very impressive. The other thing I would just say is that in relation to impressive, I was part of the judging panel visit to Southmead, and believe it or not, as we were walking around, we were stopped more than once by mothers with babies and other people to ask how things were coming along. Now that in itself was an extraordinary indictment, or not indictment, support of the process that was going on. That's extremely unusual to be asked that. And it's clear that people on the ground were involved in the project enough to be interested at that sort of level. I think Mike will probably remember talking to 1 or 2 people as we were going around.
Yeah,
so,
well, yeah, it looked a bit like they were a plant. But yeah.
Yes, we did suspect this, but clearly this wasn't the case. And we've had 1 or 2 examples of that actually in this last competition, where people have literally just come up to us and unsolicited and given their support. So for obvious reasons, but particularly the community involvement aspect, this was seen as a wonderful example of planning excellence, and it was highly commended in the 2019 awards. And these were presented, seems like another era now, but in January of this year. Yes, it was January when things were different. The awards were made. So I think on our programme, Charlotte, we have opportunities for questions and answers and discussion. Now, I'm not quite sure who's going to lead on this, but perhaps Sue might have things to ask on that. Can I invite you to do that, Sue? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. And can I just say an absolutely huge thank you to everyone for putting that together. It is one of the most interesting And it's very uplifting to hear what you've done and what you've achieved and how the community have brought it together. I know, Mike Merck, we missed a little bit of what you were saying, but you were talking about the power of going round and knocking on every door on that estate to actually get a response from everybody. And I can't think of another example that I've come across where a community has actually gone to that degree of effort to make sure that every voice is heard. So I thought that was absolutely tremendous to do that. And I know, Mike, we lost you a little bit, so if you want to add to that, please do.
Yes, well, I mean, not only that, but I mean, subsequent to that, we've got a local newspaper called The Mead, or at least we did have before the lockdown. And there have been several occasions where we have actually posted The Mead and subsequent leaflets through every letterbox on the estate. Just
I think Mike has disappeared again.
We've lost him again, but I think we got
with exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely what Mike has just described there. Absolutely, to me, at the heart of everything. It's keeping everybody informed. It's not what we tend to see in what, you know, I don't want to call in traditional consultation, where you have an event and the information is received and then not shared back out. It's listened to and then and good work is done, but this sharing, this actual continual engagement and momentum, I think is really very special, and something that you really, you know, it's an exemplar in it. It really is. And I think, Finn, the point you were talking about the 3-month intensity, that addresses so many of the challenges that we have thrown at us when we're doing community engagement. And please jump in if you don't think I'm right. But the challenge from developers very often is, well, this is just going to delay the project. We've got to do this, this, and this. And what you've demonstrated is actually it doesn't delay it, because it's all part and parcel of it. It's planned in and it's taken forward. Now, please do jump in.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more with that, really. I think that's exactly right. I mean, you know, I think I've often heard that potentially from, you know, developers, we haven't got time to do this, or it's going to slow us up, and or we'll start designing and then you can do that alongside it later, or and I think it might seem like a shortcut, but I think in the long run this project demonstrates that there's a lot of value in doing it this way. Look at the support that Mike Fox was talking about when it came to, I mean, leave aside the fact that even if you're looking at it very objectively, it's going to help your process, and it's taking risk away from the project. But actually, as well as taking risk away from the project, it's improving the quality. A lot of the detail that we came up with, you know, we talked about the specific kind of balconies and the colours and everything, and we're creating something quite distinctive and unique and very much rooted locally. I think it adds to the value, both economic and social value of what we were trying to do. I don't think some of the things we would have come up with the design wouldn't have looked the same if we hadn't followed that process. And I think it's all the better for it. You know, it's in every way you look at it, it's resulted in a higher quality process and outcome. So it is really important. And I think what you mentioned about the sort of momentum, I think, is key as well. So it has, I think people have to feel like things are moving forward. If you have big gaps between communications or events, people don't feel involved. They need to feel like it's an ongoing sort of conversation. And things like putting the posters up on the shop window on the corner of Arnside, everyone in Southmead walks past that every day pretty much, or at least once a week. You know, there's lots of different ways to see what's happening, and so when Jeff talks about people walking up to us and talking about it, it's because genuinely I would say like 99% of people in Southmead knew all about our projects. They really understand what's happening, and that is a lot to do with the trust and the way they communicate with people in the Mead. But it was also the process that helped people engage, and I think kind of inspired people a little bit. There were, as I mentioned, sorry, I'm going on a bit, but just one final point. Not everyone was super inspired by what we were proposing to begin with. I can't sort of explain, you know, I can't stress that enough. It wasn't a foregone conclusion that it was going to be successful. And I think the way we went about it and the way we involved people helped it to become more successful, I think. I'll stop there because I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. But
I can see Paul wants to come in.
Yes, I just want to say the council is a significant landowner in Southmead, and the community-led master plan, which includes all the ingredients or bits of the jigsaw for a successful neighbourhood, as well as delivering much-needed new homes in the area, is being very much used as a template by the council to bring forward its own sites for development in line with the master plan, in line with community needs to make for a great area. So it's been a great project to be involved in.
Paul, you've actually taken the words of my next question, which were coming to you, out of my mouth. It's the transferability of what you've done here across other parts of Bristol that are similar, and I think it's just fantastic. And I know I've listened to your mayor, and I know you know, just how passionate he is about community engagement and making sure that Bristol, you know, people are involved, because at the end of the day, what is it all about? Planning is for people, and it's about the places and the spaces that people live. And it's also something that is, I mean, I can't imagine why everyone isn't wanting to be a planner, but the decisions that you've taken and that planners take, they're going to outlive any of us on this call. They will be there for generations to come. And I think that the challenges you described in the planning application process that link to that sort of climate change, that sustainability, the heat, then that's actually thinking about not just the people, the now, but the future. And so I thought that was great. So my question for Amy, if I can throw one at you, Amy, you said at the start that you'd taken up the post in October. When you got thrown into all this, what jumped out? What's the key thing that jumped out? What was making you think, I'm going to go and do this? This is what, so this is at the heart of it.
Yeah, I think there's a few things, because it is a really ambitious scheme. And when I started, I was a bit surprised. I was like, wow, do you not think of going for like doing a small community-led housing project then, or like regenerating the whole of the whole of central Southmead? But I think there's something about there's been some challenging conversations, but there's also a really good strong single voice in Southmead across a lot of the key stakeholders. So people have had those really difficult conversations. You know, they're happy to sit in a room and have things out with each other, but then they form a single strong voice, which is so essential. And then, you know, Finn and Mike have touched on it as well, but it needs bravery, a scheme like this. You know, it is really ambitious, and people are prepared to do something that, you know, is making a real statement. And that really stood out to me as soon as I started meeting, you know, the key community leaders and the partners, that people have that it needs confidence, you know. And I think that that's where all the kind of community development work is so essential, because a lot of people who've been involved in this project are people who've also, you know, so Mike runs the local planning group, or people have run a walking group, or they run a local coffee morning, or, you know, it's very small things where people start and they think, do you know what, I can make a difference, I've got confidence, I can make something happen. People do listen to me, and they see that being successful, and then they build that confidence to take on a big scheme like that. So, you know, that long-standing community development is so central to all of this. Yeah. And I think that's out to me.
You hit the nail on the head with that. It's that importance of going out and people just feeling that part of something, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
You couldn't jump to a big scheme like this. Like all of that work is it, you know, leads you to it. Yeah.
I think that's wonderful what you just said there. It's really wonderful. Thank you. And the last question I've got is for Mike. If you had to get out there and talk to other consultants who are facing a task like this, say in Birmingham or Newcastle or somewhere like that, what would be your key message?
It won't be easy, but it'll be very rewarding. so you should definitely do it. Would be the first what I'd start with. Be prepared to get your boots dirty, as they say. Get on the ground. I think Finn was brilliant for us. I mean, we all got involved in the community engagement side, but Finn was able to actually be our man in Southmead, as he became known, and just go on the ground and spend, you know, a week at a time, literally just maybe doing the raving street stalls that he did, or attending coffee mornings, or those kind of things. So really just getting under the skin of the place. So putting aside the time to do that. I think being prepared for the fact that there's going to be a lot of people with a stake in it, in the project, and understanding how you're going to manage all those voices. You know, I think being adaptable and flexible, and not trying to apply your usual, if consultants have that approach to a project, you know, it's not a kind of off the peg type of project at all, and you've got to kind of go with the flow a little bit in projects like this. But that's what makes it all the more rewarding. And in a way, going back to what you've been saying, I think it's about empowering the community. It's about helping them articulate their vision, and it's about facilitating making it happen, really. So that's the way you should see yourself as a planner on a project like this. It's not about trying to control everything, which can be very hard for a planner, I know.
I think that and what we heard today illustrates the you know, the growing confidence and excellence of the work that the Nash Partnership are doing. They have offices in Bath and Bristol, as you know, and this again has come through very strongly in this in their submissions and in this award.
Thank you.
So I hope that I know this is being videoed, and I am so pleased it's being videoed, because I think for those who got to this point in the video, you'll have learned so much. People, I think, cannot fail to be inspired by what you've done and what you've achieved, and hopefully take away some of those lessons. You probably saw me scribbling really hard. I have written an awful lot, and there's some lovely phrases and things that you've used that really resonate. So thank you for those. Thank you, huge thank you to Jeff for I've got Mike wanted to say something at the bottom. Mike Murch.
Can I just say that finally, I was born in Southmead, brought up in Southmead, and have been around Southmead pretty much all my life. And as far as I'm concerned, this is for Southmead residents by Southmead residents.
Well done.
What a wonderful way to end it. That's perfect, isn't it?
Well said. Yeah, good.
The one thing I think that's probably the end of it, Charlotte, but I did want to ask a favour of the, particularly the people who are on the screen at the moment. I'm going to write a piece up for the President's page, and it will be my honour to write this up. I haven't got a lot of words, but what I love to do, if I can, is put pictures in. So again, I haven't got a lot of space for a lot of pictures, but if you have got 2, maximum 3 pictures that you feel actually convey what we've talked about today, I would love to be able to use those to visually portray the things that you talked about, rather than just words that people sort of skim over. It's the image, isn't it, that's, as you find in consultation, the visual that is the communication tool. So real thanks. And again, just back to Jeff, what I was going to say to Jeff, you wrote an amazing piece with a brief on the Southwest region in advance of this. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And would it be possible if we were to actually add it to as a download, if I can sort it through RTPI on the note that covers the visit? Because I think people would find it really interesting.
I think we've got it on the Southwest part of the RTPI website, so I'll give you the link soon.
It's on the link to that, yes. Because it is relevant to other elements of your proposed visit this year, as you probably gather. So as well as Bristol and South England and the West of England, yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. And if today is anything to go by, well, I'm just already blown away. So thank you all ever so much. I really mean that. Thank you.
Well, and my thanks to everyone who was involved and made it a successful visit, if I can put it that way.
And more importantly, a successful Southmead.
Yeah, we watched.
Yes.
With interest. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and thank you particularly to the residents of Southmead and those in the generation and planning group who have driven it all forward.
Yes.
Yeah. Cheers, Paul.
Bye.
Right.
Bye then.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.